Now, the big thing we need to consider is that we have a lot of diversity in our world today, and the biggest diversity factor we're dealing with in our classrooms and in our workplaces is we have 4 active generations right now in our workplace. We have the builders, the baby boomers, the Generation Xers, and the millennials. And you'll see them called different things, and you may see the dates slightly different depending on what study you look at, but the concept is the same. Do these people expect the same thing out of a training session, expect the same out of a customer service encounter, expect the same in working with someone in the workplace? Does every one of the people in all those groups expect the same thing? Nope. Why not? They're people, they're getting paid, they're in the workplace, why not? You got left brain, right brain issues. Yeah, what else is going on there?
Life experience.
Life experiences, yeah. Goals, what else?
You have people that aren't as accepting and understanding of technology, so you got technology.
Some people are better at technology than others, absolutely. There's all kinds of factors. The bottom line is these people have lived different lives. They've experienced different things. What was important during their eras, if you will, is not as important in another era potentially. And to complicate it even further, if you were born on the cusp, which means you were born in 1945 or 1946 or 64 or 80 or 99, you could have the traits of both your generation and the next generation because you're experiencing a lot of those things. So you've got a lot, as a facilitator and as a trainer and as a learning and development professional, you've got all kinds of factors you have to consider, don't you? You've got to be a humanist, you've got to be a behavioralist, you've got to be a psychologist, you've got to be a trainer. I mean, no wonder we're tired when we go home. I mean, we were carrying all these hats. We need a raise. That's what we need, don't we? So go back and tell your bosses that and say, Bob said so, and here's why. Give them tangible evidence because they need that. They need to hear that. But again, you've got a lot of information in your materials there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about these groups. If you haven't researched the values of these groups, if you haven't researched what's important to these groups, I encourage you to do that because that becomes an opportunity for you to deliver information that's important to them in a way that's going to help them most effectively gain, retain, recall, and use it. Lots of things to think about as we go forward, and again, that's why I ask you on your Bright Ideas page to write down anything you want to go back and do some additional research on. So what questions do you have up to this point about anything I've talked about? Again, if you can't tell, we're moving at warp speed here.
I think I will.
Yes, ma'am.
You're talking a lot about the 3 different learning modalities.
Yes.
Have you done any research on the 4, that there's a 4th learning modality?
Which is what?
The VARC.
The VARC.
The
Okay.
VARC concept.
Right.
The visual is actually should be split into visual and reading.
Yeah, I've read about that. I'm not sure. She's asking about the visual, auditory, kinesthetic modalities. Some research shows in the VARC study, there's actually a survey you can give your learners to determine what their preferences are, that you divide the V into visual and in the reading component there, whatever. What I have seen is that there isn't enough empirical evidence to prove that at this point. It's a theory, but like all these others are, but it's something you should at least be aware of because you are going to have people who are going to be looking for things. They're going to be delving into things more than others, and there are opportunities there, I think, as a facilitator to deliver more concise information for those individuals. But if you go look up VARK, or VAK rather, and if you are looking to, or VARK, I'm sorry, if you are looking to find additional ideas, then that's another piece to add to your puzzle, if you will. Does that kind of answer your question? Do you have any additional research?
Because I've been doing training, and I have them take it. There's a free assessment online,
right?
And I'm all about free.
Yeah.
So you can send your learners and have them take the free assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And it just opens up a conversation.
Absolutely.
I always struggled with identifying myself as a visual learner because if you give me a book,
mm-hmm.
forget about it. So I kind of like the idea that it's separated visual as far as images, org charts,
right.
maps, pretty pretty colors from Word. And so it's just interesting stuff.
If you're not familiar with Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, that's another thing to go out and research. It goes more in, I think it more addresses what you're talking about, multiple intelligences. When you get into linguistic intelligence, it talks up to that degree about some of that. And again, we don't have a lot of time to go in detail, but look up Howard Gardner, multiple intelligences. There are 8 of them based on his research, and he believes there's probably more intelligences rather than just the standard IQ type things that we've been doing for years, that there are other ways that people are intelligent, and there are ways to bring that in. I talk about that in more detail in some of my other programs when we have more time, but go out and research that. If you have specific questions, check me out. Give me a call. You've got my card there, my information. Also, just not for promotional purposes, but there's about 180 articles, a lot of them on brain-based learning and training on my website. They're free for your use. Feel free to download them, use them as handouts if you want to. All I ask is you leave the attribution pieces in place. And if you're going to republish them, please let me know that and tell me how you're going to use it. As long as it's not for sale, I don't care. So, all right. So let's move on very quickly here. We're going to run out of time before we get through all this otherwise. Think about some of the strategies for each of these generations that we talked about very quickly. And to give you an idea, when you're thinking about, and again, I think this is page 7 of your handouts, if you're thinking about what you can do with the different environmental elements when you're dealing with the different generations, think about what you can change about what you're currently doing, what you can add, what you can delete, and how it's going to better help those individuals in that particular generational group to make sure that they're getting the most out of it. We know that builders came from a very structured time when things were more austere. There's a lot of authoritarian stuff in the workplace. I'm the boss, I tell you what to do, you go do it. And they were happy to do that because that's what the norm was. They got paid, I get paid $1 to do $1's work, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be there on time, whatever. So you've got to think about how that impacts your learning as you move forward in designing your programs and delivering your programs. They're dependable in the workplace. There's a variety of things. Again, if you go out and research these different generations, you will find some of this information. But I just want to point out a couple things because they like very structured environments, training-wise, obviously. They expect you to tell them a lot of things as opposed to having them break into groups and brainstorm and come up with these ideas and throw in technology, and you may skew some of their thinking totally because they'll totally freak out. And again, I'm generalizing here, but in some instances that may be the case, as it will be with all these generations. When you get to the next generation, which is your boomer generation, that's my generation, we challenged everything. I mean, we're the ones that had the protest and the Vietnam War, and we were anti this, anti that. If there was anything out there, we were anti. And we were also an experiential group, as some of you may have heard. Not me, but Bill Clinton, I think, admitted once that, no, he didn't inhale, though, did he? I can't forget. Anyhow, the thing that we recognize is that each group has their own dynamics. Each group focuses on things. We like sharing ideas. We like the networking. We like the brainstorming opportunities. So think about how can you build those collaborative opportunities into your learning events as you're moving forward in your design. When you get to Gen X's, those are our kids, the boomer kids. And again, they started getting exposure. They had the Pac-Man and all the real high-duty stuff way back when, where the basic technology was coming into play. And they started learning about technology. We started having cell phones, and albeit they were this big, but we had cell phones that we used and such. So when they were children, they started to becoming exposed to these things. In your learning environment, you can probably build in technology and they'll be comfortable enough with it. And again, depending on the closer they get to the millennial age, the more competent they're going to be, the more comfortable they're going to be with technology. But look for ways to focus on things related to the workshop, tie it into, as the slide says here, explain how they're going to be able to apply it. Don't make them think too much about application, because they'd rather have you share ideas with them in some cases. And again, each individual within each of these groups is going to be a little different, and they're going to share some commonalities, but they're also going to share some distinct differences. And the final group is the millennial group. Again, these folks were technology teens. They started out with a computer in their playpen, and from there on, it's been technology, 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 right into the latest generation, which is coming into the workplace here by 2015. We'll start seeing entries into that, 15, 16-year-olds, and they definitely are tech savvy. So you need to start thinking about, how am I going to use mobile learning? How am I going to use social media? How am I going to build these elements into my learning environments? How do I do blended learning as opposed to just classroom type learning? Because these last two groups, the millennials and the 9/11 generation, as some groups are calling them, I haven't seen any official studies on that yet, but the 9/11 generation is going to thrive on the technology opportunities. Also remote training as opposed to being in a room like this. That's going to be very important in that aspect. So you got to build in blended. If you need them in a room where they network, which is important because, again, we were talking about this on the way over, a future skill we're going to start seeing on resumes is probably the ability to talk to someone. Because if you probably are experiencing that with your own kids if you have them, or with others, they'd rather do this and they have to go get their thumbs reconnected every once in a while because they wear these down to nubs, but they do it all through technology as opposed to getting up and talking to somebody or picking up the phone and calling them, etc. And again, I'm generalizing to get through this very quickly, but these are things as trainers we need to consider, don't we? Okay. All right. So, yeah, absolutely.
As far as training and rewarding, I'm noticing that the millennium expects rewards and like thrives off of them, where the elders did not. I mean, it was expected. It just seems like the younger the generation is, the more they want.
Well, and again, her question is, some of the comments, builders didn't get a lot of rewards, millennials expect them. As we've moved forward, we have become a society of anticipation. We have people who believe that it's their right to have stuff given to them, and that carries over into our learning environment. That's why you build in little rewards and things of that nature. That's why you have an opportunity to have people share things, if you will. And so how do you build that in? I mean, it can be something as very, simple as, giving them a reward. Each of you got a ticket when you came in the room, correct? We're going to have a drawing at the end for a little prize here, but something as simple as that can be built in. Whereas the builders, I mean, they were going through the Great Depression and all the other issues that were going on back then. They just wanted to survive. And so the idea of having somebody give them something was like way out there. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay. And again, if you go back and do research.
That's what I just was asking. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yes, I am seeing.
A lot of my classes have all 4 generations in it. Mm-hmm. It's hard to cater. You can't cater to any one of them. So I'm trying to figure out the balance.
Absolutely. What's important to each group is going to be very important. That's why I say go back and do some research. So how do you help these people learn, all these groups and all these different various backgrounds that we bring to the learning environment? You build in time for them not only to gain the information but also to process it. Act as a conduit. Your goal up here is to share the information but also help them see, and this is how you can use that. And it might be having them share with you, how would you use that? Similar to what I did with the activity earlier, where I said, what could you use this for? What kind of concept could you teach? Help them bridge that, because don't assume that they're going to figure this out on their own. Some people walk out there going, okay, what am I going to do with all this stuff now? So it's like a staff meeting. You sit through somebody talking for 30 minutes and you get up and you walk out and say, now was I supposed to do that or were you supposed to do that? I know none of you have ever been in that situation, right? But these are things, again, that we have to think about and build into our programs. So look for opportunities. where you build in some of these brain-based strategies I've been talking about as well. Look for ways to add color, sound, motion, novelty, all these different elements that can help you. Build in music at the beginning as we had when you walked into the room. Look for ways to tie to a theme. The key is that anything you say, do, or use in your learning environment should have a purpose and should be focused at your learning objectives. Focus on how do you help them gain knowledge that you originally had designed into the program. And your program design obviously has to come from a needs assessment. I know that companies don't want to pay for it, they don't want to spend the time, effort, or money on it, but if you can do anything to have that happen, please do it, because it's such a crucial part, especially related to brain-based learning. You need to find out, are they visual, auditory, kinesthetic? You need to find out other things about them, their current base of knowledge, what their jobs are, those type things, because that's going to help your design. And unfortunately, many organizations fail to let you do that. How many of you worked with a client or an organization that didn't want to do needs assessment? They didn't see the value. How did you sell that idea to them?
I'll let you know when I figure it out.
Still working on figuring it out, okay? Anybody figured it out? Yes, sir.
One way they were trying to approach it, and this is based off of the Business of Learning book that's out there, is if you talk to them about the amount of time and money they're spending on their associates being in the classroom, if you talk to them in the dollars and cents of what they're not doing in their regular job because you want to stick them in the classroom and learn something else, sometimes that'll help people understand that you're investing time in these people. They're not doing what you're paying them to do. How much of that money do you want to spend on them sitting in the classroom?
Absolutely.
If that's a problem for them, then you say, all right, let's figure out what they really need and how many of them actually need it. And then you bring it back to dollars, and that helps.
So we're doing a cost-benefit analysis, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, but enough that they know that you understand what numbers are.
Absolutely. Did everyone hear all that? Okay. So again, we're trying to get them to see that you pay me now, pay me later. If we don't have training, if we don't do these things, if we don't do the right things, then ultimately it's going to cost us money either way. We're going to have to do more training, we're going to have to do some training, whatever. So, thank you. All right, finally, look at ways to engage your learners. Build in what I call interim reviews. That balloon activity I mentioned earlier is one example of that. And I would encourage you to build those in at least every 15 to 20 minutes, typically in a longer workshop. Not so much the review part, but it could be from how many of you have used this, or how many of you whatever. Something that simple, or maybe midway through a morning activity or morning event, you stop halfway and you say, okay, let's do an interim review. And it might be something that has strips of paper and balloons. It could be you have them write down one key concept they've experienced to that point and toss it to someone else, and then read those and have other people talk about how would they use that or how's it been used. Look for creative ways to engage people to build into the brain-based concepts, but at the same time reviewing those key concepts, because more times they hear it, see it, taste it, touch it, or feel it, the more likely they're going to be able to gain, retain, recall, and use it. So build in as much to that sensory review as you can, so that ultimately you find them being able to walk out of there and use that information. Okay. All right. Any questions? Normally at this point I would stop and have you do a quick review. But since I know you probably have to get back to work, I'm going to forego that. Consider yourself reviewed. Look at ways, think of some of the things we've talked about, think some of the things you've seen in the room thus far, and think about how could you apply them. Maybe on your Bright Ideas page, write down, go back and think about ways to apply whatever. And to give you some additional thought, again, keep an eye open on the internet. There's just tons of stuff out there. There's nothing you can't Google. I love this thing. I mean, there's nothing. Has anybody ever typed something into Google and you didn't find something about it? I try to trick it all the time, and I've never been able to trick it. Even if I do some obscure little statement, it comes up with something. It may not have anything to do with it, but it comes up with a list, which is just amazing to me. I just can't get my head around that whole process. But I've never been the brightest bulb in the pack anyhow, though, so we won't go there. All right, any questions on anything? Yes, ma'am.
Since we missed the balloon activity,
yes.
can you give us an example of what's inside the balloon?
There are strips of paper that are things we've covered up to this point, and we can quickly talk about that. What are some of the things that tie to brain-based learning that you've experienced since you walked into this room? Assuming the balloons are still on the wall. What are some of the things you've seen or heard or experienced since you walked into this room? Visual aids, okay. And what about them?
It stimulated learning.
Okay. Anything special about them?
They were the balloons were
We use color. Remember I told you color are a way you can introduce color subtly. The graphics in color, those type things. There are different ways to introduce color. Have you ever walked into a room and it's very sterile? The handouts are white, the tablecloths are white, there's nothing on the wall. My gosh, look, we're here. Oh, I'm sorry, I digress. The reality is that a lot of times we don't have that visual stimulation. Consider your environment when people walk in. Use colored cover sheets on your handouts. Then you can use those to break people into groups later on. You can say if you've got a blue handout, you're over here, red handout, you're over there, whatever. So you can tie in those kinds of functionality to the other things. The balloons, again, were colorful. When you pop them, they make sounds. So again, that's another element of brain-based learning. The review piece is a very important part of brain-based learning to help people go back and reflect on it. So different things that you can do related to those kinds of activities. What else have you experienced? Cookies. Okay. So you got food, right?
The smell of coffee.
The smell of coffee. Okay. The stimulation of coffee. Coffee is a nice smell.
The different generations.
The different generational issues. Okay. What else have you seen related to brain-based learning? There was some music playing. Did any of you hear that before you got here? Some of you who got here late heard a lot of talk, so we finally just turned that off because we couldn't get any louder without blowing people out of here, so we just gave up on that idea. But have music playing as people walk into the room and during your breaks or such. What else have we experienced? Group interaction, albeit very short because of the time constraints. The different types of activities. What did I do up front? Use this as an analogy for the brain growing. Okay. What else did I use?
You made us stand up and clap for you.
Made you stand up? I didn't make you, I asked you. Come on, be nice. I would never make you do anything. I asked you to stand up and clap and do the applause. Again, I got you involved early on. What else? And add a little levity to the process. What else did I have you seen? Okay. The graphics in the materials, there's a clue here. Those type. The right brain, left brain, absolutely. We've identified different ways and we've applied some of those things. So again, that's typically what would be on the strips, just a quick thing. Use of balloons, use of music, whatever. And I'd have people pop it and either individually stand up with a strip of paper and read it, and somebody else would have to say, how would that be effective in my program? And it sort of helps them do that bridge thing we talked about. And you could do the same thing with a strip of paper where they write it down, and they toss it to one another, they all stand up and read it, and it depends on the size of your group, obviously. And other types of activities are all often very helpful there. Okay. All right, any additional questions? Yes, sir.
If you tailor this to real-time interactions that are forced into distance learning, you still have to look for aspects of this. You just don't have the sensory things that are happening. You can't. You may choose, if you can't see the people,
Right.
but you can hear them on a phone.
Right.
You can visually show them something like a web-based technique for training. There's a couple of them.
Absolutely.
But then you'd have to do it in the graphics and the animation, or
Tone of
no
voice.
words at all, go to full pictures, or
Yeah.
play a video or something to try to spark up
stimulate.
those other things.
Absolutely. Did everyone hear that? If you're doing distance learning, technology-based learning, you can build in some of these elements through the use of words, through the use of graphics, different screen changes, variety of things you can still build in even though you're not face-to-face with those individuals. Color, use color. If you're doing slides, use colors, use graphics, use music. You can still build that stuff in. So again, this stuff applies no matter what you're doing in learning and development. Okay. All right, questions? All right, I'll be in the back of the room if you want to come back if you have additional questions. Thank you very much.